Awesome. And we're live. Welcome to the Eat Well Move Well radio show. Welcome to the Straight Talk Mind and Muscle podcast. Nick Caldwell, Miller Jim, great to see you again. Thanks for jumping on.
Thanks for having me, mate. Welcome.
Look, just as we were chatting before, it was the last show was brilliant, really well received, especially by your crew. I'm just going to, for the benefit of the audience, give a little rundown. I'll try not to butcher it too much. But Nick, you're former Special Forces, Australian SAS, Australian Commandos. You've been out for over, I think, around a decade now, and you're running the Mill Gym here in Perth. Brilliant place, based on the Jim Jones, based on the 300 sort of mentality. Really successful. The last show, you painted a great picture about your career, your journey into the Special Forces, and your transition. It was amazingly, you're amazingly open about that. But I'd like to talk to you about what I didn't touch on, which was your chronic fatigue.
Yeah, sure. Love to, mate. Like I really, I haven't really talked about it with on this format anyway, but I think the main thing is that, like everything we do, especially in this space, it's really important that we pass the knowledge forward or pay it forward. So any little gems that anyone can get out of my journey, I'm more than willing to share. Pretty much nothing's off the table, so to speak. Yeah, we're willing to cover as much of it as you need to.
Well, thank you. Maybe that's why it was so well received. And what I mean by that, I mean, I get a lot of views on the different shows, but I've never had as many private messages on all the platforms as I have about the show with you. And I do think I interview a lot of vets. People look at our Special Forces guys and they must put us on a pedestal, or they must put us in a niche, probably a box where we belong. But I don't think we're like how they see us. And I think we are very open. And that's what I loved about listening to you that time. So let's talk about chronic fatigue. What is chronic fatigue, and how the hell did you find out you had it? Tell us through the start of that journey, please.
Yeah, okay. Well, chronic fatigue is basically something you get diagnosed after about 6 months of having basically a level of fatigue or exhaustion which disables you from doing day-to-day tasks that anyone else takes for granted. So even things like, waking up, having a clear head throughout the day, being able to get out of bed, being able to have the energy to go and have a shower and stand in the shower. It's a level of fatigue which I'd never experienced up to that point in my life, but it basically disabled me from doing anything. Everything from even getting up and having a meal. You just don't want to do it. You're so tired. Everything all the way up to having sex with your wife, all that sort of thing. So it's one of those things that it takes the quality of your life away from you purely because you're too tired to do just normal things.
Wow. What a horrible place to be, man.
Yeah, mate, it's crazy. And it's one of those things also that it's very difficult to diagnose. So they wait 6 months before they diagnose it. If you're still experiencing that level of fatigue, because most people you can go to bed and you recover, and then you go to bed the next night and you can get a certain amount of sleep where you can start to claw back some of that sleep debt. And with chronic fatigue, it doesn't matter how much you sleep, it never comes back, and you're always at a level of fatigue where sometimes it's manageable, where you can actually get on and do the day like a normal person. Other days you just have to very much lock it in, stay at home, sit on the couch, whatever it is you need to do just to get through it. So and sometimes it's very hard to predict it. So, and in other cases, it's brought on by things like malaria, dengue fever, Ross River fever, all those sorts of things, or you've got a life which is just where it's so fast paced and there's so much going on that you basically go with it, and you go with it to the point where you can't make a recovery on it. And it comes down to about sleep debt, what they call sleep debt. So you can get a debt to, you could probably, maybe if you've got 4 hours sleep a night and you're supposed to have, according to your body type or whatever it is, 6 to 8 hours. Well, automatically you become in 2 hours debt. Now, it's very hard to gain that debt back, especially if you let it go for years and years. So to the point where I got diagnosed, I'd probably been going for about 2 years at a high level of fatigue. By the time I crashed, I literally couldn't do anything. I was like that for nearly a year.
Wow. I hear what you're saying about the sleep debt, man. I listened to Jason Fox's audio book. He's a British SBS
Yes.
operator, and he was operating on like 2 to 4 hours sleep over there, and that didn't erupt into chronic fatigue syndrome, but it did erupt into a mental health
Yeah.
degradation. It's funny you say that straight off about sleep debt and recovery. A couple of guys I interview, we all say that psychology comes from your biology, and sleep is where you regrow things and you repair from the day. And if your psychology, so not only were you saying you're tired, but how your moods are, how you present, that comes from your biology, and that then creates a different person. When did this first start to happen? This first sort of 6 months going on, Nick?
Well, basically when I crashed was after, so we'd been on team for about 6 months. We came back from a deployment overseas. Our squadron went straight on to team, and I was a sniper in counterterrorism training. That's what team is. So with obviously the tempo for that is pretty high. We do a lot of reverse cycles. So we work during the night, sleep during the day. And a lot of our exercise, especially as a sniper, you spend a lot of time awake because in a perfect world, you'd have all the snipers will be present and on the task doing the job. But the way the job works is guys are off doing courses or taking leave or on a deployment somewhere else. So the amount of guys on the ground at any one point in time is usually a fraction of what our full complement is. So the guys that are on the ground are actually basically covering the requirement of maybe 2 or 3 people. So we were happy to do it because that was our job. We wanted to get really good at our job. But obviously you get a point where I think I was about 30, and up to a certain point, at a certain age, you can tolerate that little amount of sleep and that higher tempo.
Yep.
But after a while, if you don't address it, which I didn't address it, then it'll come back and bite you. So that's basically what I believe happened to me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially given my framework of knowledge regarding sleep and stress side of things. So you're on the team, you're in the SAS, and you don't have the energy to get out of bed. What the hell do you do, man?
Well, it's a lot of soul searching, that's for sure. I was just thinking, what's going on here? Aren't I apt to this job? Or I associate my identity, identified myself as someone who was an operator.
Yep.
So when you can't operate like that, you think less of yourself. And for what it's worth, that's that point in time when you look back at it, it was a silly way to look at it. But that's the benefit of hindsight. But back then, that was my whole world. That's everything I trained for, everything I thought about, everything I dreamed about, everything I'd worked for to be a sniper on a counterterrorism team was up there with it. So to not be able to do it and actually make dumb mistakes, I was making dumb mistakes because I was waking up tired and I was trying to do a complex task with high explosives or out in the middle of the ocean or with high caliber weapons in a suboptimal state. Now, doing that job, you'll never really be in an optimal state because the way it works is you're working hard a lot of the time. You're spending a lot of time awake. You might be doing a reverse cycle where you spend all your working hours at night. That you'll never be optimal, but the training enables you to be able to triage problems and also prioritize things that are more beneficial to assist you to work in that environment. Yep. Because worst case scenario is war. That's suboptimal. So to be able to deal with that chaos is part of the job. So I'd be working, going, feeling tired. I'd ask one of my operators, "Mate, are you tired?" He goes, "Yeah, I'm tired." Everyone's tired, but everyone's operating suboptimally. But they're also operating at a level because they train so often and their skills get so heightened that they could say to themselves suboptimal, but it's still sitting in the elite bracket, for want of a better term. They're still sitting at a level where they're operating at a much higher level than most people who hadn't had the training and the funds and the resources to do that level of training and do that sort of work. But to me, it wasn't good enough to not be able to do that, not be able to rock up that day, doing silly mistakes whilst on the job, and having my cohort and my peers see that was just like constantly just talking myself down. So when I got to that point where I could not cope, I just basically couldn't get out of bed. I just thought, okay, I've got to lock this in. There's nothing I can do about this now. I've just got to sleep. And I was very lucky at that point to get the support of my OC, my SSM, my troop sergeant, my boss at the same time. And most of the guys in my troop knew what was going on. They could see it going on. And so I had that in my head, but it still wasn't enough to say, okay, you're all right, mate. Just take the time. You're okay. I was actually falling into depression, becoming anxious about the situation, and that snowballed the fatigue. So it took me, longer than it probably should have to actually get to a state where I can actually function at a normal level.
That paints a really interesting picture. I guess the next question for me would be, were your first point of contact, was it the doctor? Was it going to the med cell? What was it?
Well, it's funny. It wasn't funny at the time, but when I spoke to the unit psychologist, because back then, this is about 2005.
Yep.
So chronic fatigue wasn't a thing. It wasn't even, no one knew anything about it. There was very few so-called specialists in the industry. And so when you go to speak to someone, you go to report to it, the first thing they'll say is, mate, go home, have a sleep, shake it off. When you've had a good sleep, come back to work. And that was the standard reply from everyone, psychologists all the way through to psychologists, psychiatrists all the way through at the end to my GP. So not getting any help, because I was actually not getting any confidence that I was going to see the other side of this, because this was going on for months to that stage. Right. And being debilitated to the point where I was in bed was like no one could give me anything, because it was just one of those things that wasn't accepted as a condition. Obviously, 20 years later, 15 years later, it is now. And there's far more information about how to manage it, how to mitigate it in the first place, but also how to manage it, especially if it's not virally induced. So if it's not a result of malaria or anything like that, then it's a result of not managing energy levels, not managing anxiety levels, not managing work levels, not being able to rest and recover when you do have those periods where you are able to rest and recover. My rest and recovery was to go jumping, and was to go run a marathon or go surfing big waves or whatever it was. So it wasn't really winding down, so to speak, when we had time off. I wasn't a big drinker. Still am not a big drinker. I wasn't big on hitting the nightclub scene or anything like that. I just like to do adventurous stuff. So in my downtime, I was continuing on the high of what I did at work, and it wasn't conducive to me being able to rest and recover.
Which is natural, Nick. I'm preaching to the choir, and I'm not teaching to suck eggs, but it's natural for people to look for those flow state triggers to get those cool chemicals in our brain. You like doing dangerous things, so do I. I also like creativity, and I like helping others, and I've seen that in you as well, and their flow state triggers. But I can see how you, as that little caveman brain inside there, has gone, this thing makes me feel good, I'm going to go jumping and doing things. So you're in the unit, chronic fatigue, everybody's on board with you now. What was your way out of it?
Basically first thing was stop resisting it. So I spent a lot of time fighting it, thinking I'm going to get better. I just need to speed this process up. But it's a process that you can't speed up, because I have no control over it. So when it got to the point where I could accept that, okay, this is what it is for what it is. No one can give you any information about how to get there. Internet started to become a thing. So I started researching stuff, but there wasn't much out there. But there was still enough out there to try everything. So everything from vitamin infusions to hypnotherapy to they even flew over the acknowledged expert in chronic fatigue over from the East Coast to Perth. Wow. Just knowing that made me feel confident about, okay, I'm still valuable, I'm still valued. Yeah. Now I've just got to get on with it so I can get back to doing what I love doing. So my ultimate goal was to get back to operating. That's it. But in order to do that, I realised I had to just let go of it. I had to relax. I had to try and find a way, not fight it, because it's something I cannot fight. I've proven that, because I tried to fight fatigue before I crashed and burned. So now it's a case of, okay, well, I've got the support measures in place. I've got an awesome girlfriend at the time who's now my wife. We live in a great, safe area. I was living in Controllables on the beach there near Swanee at the time. So living in a great location, had good mates, good friends around me. I had the time now and the ability to go seek information or seek specialists, seek some sort of advice about how to deal with it. And little by little, I started to piece together a thing that would start to get me back to normal. And even that took a long time. So it took me at least 3 years to get to the point where I felt, okay, confidently, I could probably get to the point where I can now deem myself as being fit. And our level of fit is slightly different to the average bear's level of fitness. But it took me a long, long time to get to what I deemed was fit enough, not quite as fit as I would like to be, or as fit as I was.
It's funny you say that. It just threw me back to a time in my training for the team, and I didn't know what a beep test was. They didn't do those back in New Zealand, and I remember the PTI was all excited. We're going to go out and do a beep test, but he didn't start it at 1. I think he started it. I mean, it was 6 in the morning. It was dark. It was on the helo pad. I think he started at like 8, and I think the last people were running it at like 16.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's it. The expectation is much higher, and that's the environment we were in. But everyone can pass the basic fitness assessment. Most of them smash it. So if we're not smashing it, we're not fit enough.
Yeah.
And that was the standard I was accustomed to. And when I was so far below that, I actually thought less of myself. And I was still the same person. I just couldn't run as fast. I couldn't do those physical things that I could have done before. And I realised that I make that switch between all those things that got me to pass that selection course and to operate in that unit and to pass a sniper's course, for example, because it's not guaranteed pass. All those sorts of things, there's something that drives me to do it. I've just got to apply that thing that drives me and temper it a little bit, because it's all, it's leaning all the way in, going 100%. Whereas with this, we're trying to deal with issues of fatigue. It's something that you go 100%, but it's 100% with hands off. Step back, let it go, let it happen. The only way you're going to get good sleep if you stop stressing about it. The only way you're going to be able to get your energy levels back is if you stop trying to drink coffee, or you just let your natural energy reserves restock, and that'll take time. And that's what it took, just that acceptance phase of understanding that, okay, this thing's going to take time, lock it in, prepare for the worst, plan for the best, but this is all you got now, just keep going.
Yeah, we've got so many buckets in our biology, and if you empty out that bucket, you got to fill it back up again. And sleep, man, eventually it will, like you say, bite you. So it's been 3 years getting over it with the sport of the squadron, sport of the team, troop, and so on. What was it just rest? Was that the main thing? I'm just trying to pinpoint, because I'm a sort of a crayon guy, literally writing in notes. What were the maybe 3 biggest things that allowed you in the Special Forces to overcome chronic fatigue, and where you were day 0 to operating?
Okay, so when I took about 6 months off, and then I got to the point where I wanted to come back to work. So I actually went, because we've got a language cell at the regiment. So basically it's a school for languages. And I did a 6-month language course at the school, because, well, why not? If I can't go back to operating, I might as well do a language course. And then after that language course, I stayed on and worked as a language coordinator at the school. So this is about 18 months down the track now. And whilst I was at the school, it was basically an office job, trying to coordinate guys coming in and studying languages, and then getting their qualifications and coordinating in-country trips, all that sort of thing, and still studying myself. And that enabled me the ability to have a routine that was set. Now, because I had a routine that was set, which is basically 9 to 5, I was able to have a routine of sleeping, which was set. And that included a routine of preparing for sleep, as well as a routine for waking up, as well as a routine for gearing up for the day. And once I understood those routines and started to dial them in and really get them fine-tuned to the point where I still use them today, I realised that having those routines and being able to celebrate the ability to do those routines and do them the best you possibly can is a win. And those little wins helped me mentally to deal with climbing this mountain. It also enabled me the time to recover, the time to get some sleep, the time to get sleep to a set pattern, let my circadian rhythms kick in and do their thing, and also leverage those circadian rhythms through the use of routines to maximise them. And I think that's the main thing, that work enabled me the time and the space, and just basically retasked me to something else. And they gave me a purpose, they gave me something to do, which is really good, and gave me something that enabled a capability within the unit. And that was the ability to speak many foreign languages wherever we deployed, and having a whole bunch of our guys being able to do that. And then slowly increasing my level of physical activity based on how I felt. Instead of training because this was the training time I had set, now I'm going to train only if I feel like I can train, and only to the intensity that I felt I could train. And that was never over 80%. Understanding that I didn't need to go 100 miles an hour every single time, as a young bloke, you could do that because you could tolerate it. But as an older guy who crashed and burned, basically burnt out, there had to be a better way to do it. And so I started slowly navigating that, working it out, planning it out, and then setting routines in place.
That's awesome. I love what you've got down there. I've got routine, sleep, a sense of purpose, and progressiveness. The sense of purpose one, I would suggest, apart from the biological, because biology creates psychology, in my opinion, the sense of purpose would be the one that dug you out of that black hole that was starting to happen with your identity.
Yeah, so it was about that time that our squadron did a rotation through SOTG in Afghanistan. So that was a big blow to me, not being with those boys. I would come back from overseas with those guys, been on team with those guys, and then those guys went to Afghanistan. I just always saw myself there. I was always self as doing that. When they deployed, I actually fell into a hole. Like, was it fully like, this is the worst thing ever. Not being with those guys, not being able to do that. But I had to put it in its place. You know, I've got no control over that. I had no control over it. They will go, this big machine will keep rolling on whether I'm there or not. They're big boys. They're going to be able to look after themselves and look after each other. Once I had that in my head, I realised, okay, it's really, in order for me to serve them, in order for me to get back and to have a functioning life and to serve my wife or whatever it is, I needed to be able to get myself right. And that became a priority. And it became one of my wife's priorities. You know, she was absolutely 100% all in, and she was able to help me get through this thing. And it would have been infinitely more difficult to get through this in a time frame that I was able to get through it without her help.
Absolutely. Controlling the controllables is exactly what you did there, but surrounding yourself with a team, and that's what it really sounds like. I've got to come back to Jason Fox's audio book, Battle Scars. It is not a happy book. He's an interesting cat now, and I'm looking forward to getting him on the show. But man, it's a dark thing. And the thing that stood out for me, Nick, was he was by himself. He wouldn't tell anybody. He was just retreating, and literally he left the military, it was Navy, Royal Navy, without anybody knowing what the hell he got out for. You. He said it was tinnitus, the absolute opposite of what you'd done. And I'm getting it with you. I hope everybody that's listening can see how positive and happy that obviously made you at the time, because yeah, when you're saying the team's gone overseas on the SOTG, and then you thought, how can I serve these guys best? That's egoless, man. And I've got to say, hats off to you.
Thanks, mate. Yeah, thanks. Well, you got to find that. I mean, like you said, you got to control the controllables, and I've got control over the way I think and the way I perceive things. People don't give themselves that credit to understand they do have more control over what they do, what they think, how they perceive the world, how they perceive other people's perception of them even. So once I realised that, it wasn't early in the piece by any stretch. There's a lot of soul searching going on to try and get through this. And you know, it was through the help of psychologists as well, psychologists and psychiatrists to deal with it. And that was a big thing for me. You know, not being able to deal with it myself, I've got to get help on it. And getting help on it was a step change. You know, they may not understand what it is we're going through in minute detail, but they don't need to, because a lot of those processes, a lot of the mechanisms you can use psychologically to improve whatever position you're in, whether you're in a hole, whether you're depressed, or whether you're in a situation that you don't want to be in. There is a way, there is a means to actually change your perception of that and start to crawl your way out of it. And once I realised that, I realised, okay, it doesn't really apply just to people who are suffering from depression, PTSD, and all those sorts of things. You can actually apply it when you're healthy. When you understand how to apply it when you're healthy, your capability, your capacity increases dramatically. So when I look back on that, I go, well, what is it that enabled me to pass Triano selection, then SAS selection, then pass every other course that we did throughout that whole continuum? And it was that, what was it about my mindset? What was it about the way I thought about problems? And whilst I wasn't thinking about that at that point, because it was all subjective, that time of having nothing else to do but try and sort myself out enabled me to look, I actually applied this situation when I was there, but I didn't realise it. I applied chunking to selection, chunking to anything difficult that we were going through. understood that what I was thinking at that time on that deployment was actually the flow state. And when I was a young kid, I was playing footy or whatever it was, there's the same state I was in, but I didn't realize at the time. I just loved what I was doing, just like I loved operating. So when you realize, well, actually, there's methods to get out of any problem. There's also methods to maximize yourself in a space. Then once you realize that, just practice it. And so they became part of the routine. So that in order for me to have sleep, I've got control over the quality and duration of the sleep I have, even though you think it's a subconscious effort. But you actually have control over it by the way you think about sleep, the way you approach rest and recovery, the way you talk to yourself before you go to sleep and prep yourself for sleep. Also prepping your environment for sleep whilst you're sleeping and before going to sleep. Then prepping your physiology for sleep by giving it certain cues that enables it to know time to switch off. Okay, he's getting ready for bed now. I'm going to switch this, and this off. I'm going to switch this on because this is going to enable me better sleep. So you have conscious control over that, and people don't understand that how much control they actually do have over things like that.
Man, it's brilliant to hear you say that. I've never actually had someone basically teach what I teach.
Likewise.
Like mines for sure. I have these grown-ups, I call them grown-ups, clients come to me and they want to fix their sleep, and 30, 35, 40, and ask them their sleep routine. And after everything's done at like 8:30, 9 o'clock, then they put on Married at First Sight. Then they have their time, or the mum, the frazzled mum puts the kids down and then she has her time. And I remind them, okay, right. Have you had a baby? They go, yeah. Right. What's the routine for putting a baby to sleep? And they tell me the routine, and they go, right, that's exactly the same as you.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's exactly the same, because we're just the human biology. And it's beautiful that you got those routines together, because, and the night, you made a very telling one, the waking one, getting that circadian rhythm, getting that light in the morning, getting those things going. You've done all the right things, man. I guess moving on from that, how is it now? That was 2005, pushed you through to 2008, getting out of that hole of chronic fatigue. Is that something you have to be aware of now as Nick Caldwell, recreation athlete, middle gym owner, and so on? Is that something you got to be aware of chronic fatigue and burnout and being clever there?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if I just relate to Jason, what you said about Jason Fox.
Oh, thank you.
So when I got out of the army, I still wasn't operating. I still wasn't able to operate 100%. There's no way I could have done SHCG and gone back to war, but I could do obviously work as an administrator in the language school. But also I went and was tasked to do bodyguarding jobs. Yeah. So at that point in time, there's a heavy workload on the boys. So being able to do a bodyguarding job was one way to contribute as an operator. But I knew full-scale war, I still wasn't able to get there.
Right.
But I had to because I wanted to come back and I wanted to become an operator. And I just knew in my head at some stage, or I thought in my head at some stage, I'd be able to get to 100% and come back and operate.
Yeah.
And obviously after 3 years, I still thought that. So when I left the military, I basically pushed for a med upgrade so that I can come back and join any one time. But I was actually lying through my teeth. I really could not do the job to its fullest extent. And to the point where I actually still had migraines plaguing me, because with chronic fatigue, I had one of the key disablers for me was the onset of migraines.
Wow.
Okay. And they just come out of nowhere, and before long I'm in bed for 24 hours. So I've got to have the lights off, the whole box and dice. And I realised that things that contribute to that, which I've got to avoid, and that's overworking, overexerting myself for an extended period of time. Also the way I thought about it, you've got to keep going, don't stop now, you're weak, all that sort of stuff. All those thoughts contributed to extra stress, which I didn't need.
Yeah. So
once I saw that, I was able to control the level of migraines, so where I could actually be deployed and do these types of tasks. But I also knew I wasn't quite there. So by the time I discharged, I was probably running at about 70%. And in an organisation like that, you needed to be far higher than that to do the job. So when I discharged, I was actually hell bent on becoming a builder, because the building thing, it made sense because you're self-employed.
Yeah. You
could work when you could, and if you couldn't work, because you're your own boss, you take the time off. So that was the original plan when I left, with the intent still that once I got back, I'm going back. I'm going to finish off what I started. And it became apparent after about 6 years that that wasn't going to happen. And when I got approached to invest in the gym, I thought, yeah, why not? The ability to be back with the boys, be back with those guys I respected most, and do something with them, or at least contribute some money to what they were doing. And after a little while, I realised that we needed a bit more help than we originally thought to get this thing going. So I spent a bit more time on that, but trying to manage that really stressful situation of working or trying to get a business that is, the business model was knocking back 90% of its applicants. So any business like that from the outstretch, without any other friction that is present with most new ventures starting out, that's putting yourself on the back foot. So that process, then dealing with, we had a bust up with partners early. Joe was one of them, there's two others at the time. That was one of the most stressful periods of my life. And migraines just started coming back on.
Oh,
but trying to get this, so all that sort of stress was made that difficult, but then the migraines factor made it really difficult. So it's one of those periods where this is worse than selection. This is worse than anything I'd ever thought, but then it's those things that I go back to. What got me through selection? What got me to the point where I'm living my dream? Those same things have got to apply here. And one of those is, I've got to get educated. I've got to learn what I don't know, because I don't know what I don't know about small business. So I've got to take the time to study it. I didn't really know how to use a Excel spreadsheet, for example. Like, I did a bit of property investing, but only at the very base level. But starting a business, I became an Excel spreadsheet master. It's one of those things that I've got to learn as much as I could and read as much as I can and get as much information about this thing from as many people as I can, get on mentors and those sorts of things. So by the time it got really, really difficult for us, and to a point where we had quite a big bust up with our partners, where I just said, right, enough's enough. This won't work if there's this much friction in it. I can control certain amounts of friction in this. If I don't control it, I'm going to go back in a hole physically, mentally. If I do control it, then at least we've got a chance of making this work. And all those guys that invested in this, at least we've got to give them a return, or give them their money back, which could otherwise gone on their food or gone on their table for their family.
Yeah.
So the drivers were there for me to make this thing happen. So when we had a bust up, I basically said, this is it, nothing else. You guys accept it or you don't. And I'm glad it's one of the best things I did, but also the most difficult thing I did. And one thing after that period, what happened was 50% of the stress that we were experiencing at that time for those 2 or 3 years had gone overnight.
Wow.
Because those personalities and that friction had gone. But I was so reluctant and so reticent to get rid of those guys, because we went to war with most of those guys, and fought alongside them.
Yeah. So
when you come to this decision point where you go, this thing is either going to fail or it's going to fly. And it's only going to fail if you guys stay in it, in my view.
Yeah.
But it'll fly if you don't. And it just so happened where we are now, because big step was getting rid of those guys. It was very difficult for me, and it caused a lot of heartache, a lot of toing and froing. But that's where the mentoring, having a mentor, came into it. So we had one of our senior guys from the unit, he'd been in the unit 30 years to that point. And I said, there was one point we had a bit of a board meeting, which is basically where we're going to start throwing chairs at each other. So I said to him, hey, can you come in and sit down and mediate, because this could get ugly?
Yeah.
And he said, no worries. He came in, and he'd been mentoring me up through that time when I was transitioning out of the military as well. And after the meeting, he said something that pretty much changed my life, because it reset my frame of reference in terms of what's important. And he said, these guys can't contribute meaningfully to the business. They'll do more damage inside the business than they will ever do to your reputation outside the business. They've got to go. So when he put it to me like that, and so succinctly and so to the point, I realised, okay, the decision's pretty clear. If this thing's going to fly, we have to make that decision. And literally 50% of stress was gone overnight. The relationship with my wife changed overnight, because she was working in business at that point. And when you realise, okay, well, environment then becomes so important. The life you live, the way you view the world can be tainted by those people in your environment who are less than optimal. I wouldn't say toxic, but there are toxic people out there, but less than optimal. Once you realise that in those spaces where you have control, and you can take control, you've got to take control, because if you allow the friction to continue to be a thorn in your side, you'll never operate optimally. And so people say to me, oh, like I mean, I gave a presentation a few months ago, and we gave a presentation on a Tuesday night, and on the Thursday we gave a full day workshop for one of these corporate companies. And on Thursday morning, one of the people who attended the workshop on a Tuesday night, she came to me and said, "Nick, I took your advice." I said, "What's that?" I said, "Oh, I kicked out my flatmate last night." I said, "Oh, I don't remember telling you to click your flatmate out."
I thought you were going to say she kicked out her husband.
yeah, but it was just a flatmate, which is good. And I said, "Why'd you do that?" And she said, "Well, he never cleaned up after himself. He stayed up all night playing computer games. He never contributed to the household. He was behind on his rent. We'd go away on holiday and come back and the house would be a mess." And we'd been thinking, but we felt sorry for him. There was 3 of them in the house, to her and a friend and this guy. And after hearing your speech on Tuesday night, I just said, I spoke to her that night, and yesterday morning we kicked him out. And I said, "How do you feel?" She goes, "I feel like my world has changed. We no longer have this dark cloud looming. You know, we had this thing where it habitualized this stress in our life where we just took it for granted. But when that stress had gone, it freed up so much bandwidth and made us so much happier in that space. Now it's our space, not something we have to worry about what we say or what we do, or having to worry about somebody else making an impact on it." So that's that ability to control the environment you've got in. That includes people. That includes like things like having televisions in your bedroom, having bright alarm clocks, or all those sorts of things which are not conducive to good sleep, for example, or having food in your fridge that is not healthy.
Well,
you know,
Nick, I'd like to touch on that if I could.
Yep.
I don't mean to interrupt your train of thought, but that's where you're going. And my next question, and I realized I hadn't asked it when I asked you about where you were now, is when I met you and then I looked at your Instagram and stuff, I figured food's a pretty important part of this guy's life. So we talked about all the lifestyle stuff, like you said, conducive to sleep, but would you be able to talk about food and nutrition with yourself there?
Yeah, sure. Well, food has a massive impact. People don't realise because they're so acclimatised to having high sugar, high fat diets. So they start to normalise the way they think based on, they don't even think it's associated with the way what they eat. So it's this thing sitting in the background which they don't associate with behaviour. It's the same with sleep. They don't associate their level of sleep with their current behaviour. And you can see that with kids. You can see that with young kids. Young kids get cranky because they're tired.
Yep.
Well, it's the same with adults. We might not get cranky, but we become less in a good mood because we've had lack of sleep.
What a good way to say it.
And that's the same thing with food. You know, we think we're not impacted by high sugar in our diet, but we actually are. Our behaviour is, because whilst we might not acknowledge it, everything in our physiology the accelerator's been pushed down on it. So everything's operating higher than it should be. Then you have caffeine and all these energy drinks and all those sorts of things. They actually compound the issue. But a lot of people take them so often that high level of operating where their physiology is at a step higher than it needs to be, therefore they're burning out quicker, therefore they're getting tighter, therefore they're getting cranky, or they're getting mood fluctuations in mood. All that sits in the background. They don't acknowledge it happening because I always drink Coca-Cola or I always drink, high energy drinks. It's just what I do. I can handle it, no worries. But it's having an effect on them, and it's a cumulative effect over time as well. So you probably, I know I'm preaching to the converted here, but we don't actually acknowledge what we're eating. So when it comes time to me trying to get back some ground on fatigue, I realise there's certain foods that actually elevate my levels of arousal, therefore elevate my levels of, disable me from reaching a state of homeostasis or a state of balance. So, and then if I keep doing this, my state of homeostasis is a much higher level than it actually should be. That's healthy. So I've actually got to readdress what it is that is important to us, nutrient-wise, as well as sleep-wise, as well as all those basic factors that make us operate optimally as a human being. And I wasn't actually subscribing to it. So I never drank coffee till I joined the army. But when I started, I was drinking so much coffee it wasn't funny because of the life we lived. It was a lot of time awake, a lot of time doing stuff. So, and then energy drinks came into it when I was at the unit. All those sorts of things that enable us to stay awake longer, to operate harder, all those sorts of things. So I basically cut all that away and said, I'm just going to eat clean. And eating clean is where you eat food which is minimally processed. In fact, probably only 2 or 3 steps of processing to get there. No sugar, no added sugar, no fat. Things like honey and that are acceptable because it's low GI, but you're aiming for low GI base level foods, which are minimal level of processing, You don't have to go all specky about it. You don't have to be really, really detailed about it. If your general rule of thumb is to eat clean, you will eat 10 times healthier than the average person on the street now.
I remember back when I was in the infantry regiment, I had a friend who always wanted to know what I'd learned about all the physical exercise and nutrition. And he asked me about food. And I really am a crayon guy. I can't believe how basic I am. I said, okay, if it's got eyes, you eat it. And if it's grown out of the ground, you eat it. You know, basically it's an animal or something. And he took that away, and he just, I mean, that's the most basic nutrition advice ever. And he just excelled. He's changed his body, his shape and things. But I love what you said there about, you know, eating clean, no added sugars, no, the processed foods. It's not complex. We probably know we should do it, just like not watching Married at First Sight at 9:30 at night. But you've really painted a picture for that first 30 minutes of where that got you to. It got you to being unable to do your job, and it really put you so far, handicapped you so much.
You had to start again. Yeah. So basically, that's why I saw it. I'm just starting again. This time I'm going to do it right. You know, it's almost like you get an opportunity to start again, and where there's no pressure on you to come back to work. There's no pressure on you to. The only pressure is the pressure you put on yourself, and that's what I'm thankful for. I mean, my OC at the time, so the officer in command of the squadron, when we started the mill and we had the bust up with my old partners, he actually came in the next day and said, "Hey, Nick, what do you need?" When your squadron commander comes to us and says that, you realise, okay, maybe I did make an impact whilst I was there at the unit. You know, maybe I did make an impact. Mate, we're mates. You know, still to this day. Obviously, he's a business partner in this business. He went on to become the CEO of the unit, then also a commander of SOTG, one of the later rotations. I believe it was actually a rotation that Ben Robert Smith got his VC.
Yeah.
So when you look at that, you go, well, maybe I have more value than I give myself credit for. And maybe this is something that I should still keep. I'm on the right track here, because people can see that maybe I am doing the right thing. So you just get little touches of confidence through all these sorts of things. And you shouldn't need other people to validate you. But when you get people you respect say, what do you need? Well, I want to invest in you. You just go, okay, well, maybe I'm doing something right. So any little bit of confidence, because back then, you know, it's like, well, I believed I was less than I was because I wasn't doing what I was accustomed to doing at the level that I was accustomed to doing it. But then I also realized, well, I can operate, but I can operate as a business operator now rather than a warfighter. I can operate as a business partner and be an elite level. I hate the word, but that level, at a higher level, as a business partner, as a husband, as a father. And I understand all these things that enabled me to reset and start again was chronic fatigue. So it's a blessing in disguise. It was the worst thing, yet I would also argue it's the best thing that happened to me at that point in time, or in my life, because I think I would be a different person without it today, potentially. Who knows? But it's that ability to reset and to really take stock of what I'm doing, where I am, who I am, how I perceive myself, how I perceive the world, and who I want to be and how I want to get there. That whole process was an awesome experience.
Yeah, the train got stopped, and as we know, trains take a long time to stop, and we see people in the transition out of the military. There's some crashes. It's funny. I spoke with Joe last week. We're talking about real life versus the army, and I used your quote. You know, the hardest thing you ever did, including war, was transitioning out of the military into real life. I call it real life because it's more complex. You know, you talk about business partners. That's not the way it works in the army. We got a simple thing, a guy going to strip aside. You talk about relationships. You're talking about liaising with civilians, and it is infinitely harder. I just want to go back, because it was great that you brought up Foxy and yourself. You talked about psychologists and psychiatrists. You know, for the people listening, especially because they're going to be looking at chronic fatigue, so probably going to get a very different demographic. For me, talking to psychologists is having a chat to someone and getting ideas from them. They're not there to analyze your brain, but they're getting ideas. And is that what you found? I mean, it would have been a brand new thing for you, chatting to a professional.
Yeah, well, when I first got it, I did not have a good experience. So when I went and saw the psychologist, the unit did not have a good experience, because he basically said, mate, you're a little bit tired, go home, sleep it off, come back to work and ready. So this is 6 months after actually stopping work. So I didn't have a good experience. I didn't go back to them until I was recommended by the chronic fatigue expert that was from the East Coast. And she said, go speak to someone. And then after a while, I realised actually this guy is actually not only helping me navigate this, but he's also giving me tools to make me better at being a better person. Yeah. Then I realised that actually these guys and girls should be framed in terms of performance enhancers, and framed in terms of performance enablers, because they might be tools that assist people with depression, but if you use them correctly, you can assist them to do anything you want. Think any way you want. Mentally condition your brain just as much as you can physically condition your body. The ability to use those tools, which are now tried and tested, there's enough science behind them. And then understanding that there are chemical imbalances in our brain which affect the way we behave. That's why they administer these things like serotonin and antidepressants, all those sorts of things. You realise that, okay, our behaviour and the way we see the world also has an influence about the chemicals that we're released in our brain. So if we change the way we perceive the world, therefore, and change our behaviours according to it, and it's really about understanding what is real, what is truth, not what is perceived or what we believe is perception. What is actually a fact of wherever you go in the world, it's truth. It stands true no matter where you are. And when you understand that there are certain truths which are non-negotiables, which this is the way it is, and one is control what you can control, mitigate what you can't control as much as you can. But then the way you perceive the world has a huge impact on behaviour. So you've got to find the way you perceive the world to be optimal. And having people like that, psychologists, they're basically coaches for your brain, enable you to perform better. Because if you go into them thinking, oh, this guy's a shrink, I don't want to tell him anything because he's going to stop me from operating, which was originally why I never saw one in the first place, because that was the common thought. Now I see them more as a performance enhancer, as a performance manager, which we can get a lot from without actually doing the course, without actually doing the study they're doing. Just go asking questions, just go see them. So as a matter of course, I go see a psychologist and got a great relationship with her. And we just talk about general stuff. It's not even therapy effectively, but I see it as therapy. And be able to order things, being able to, it helps me with my day-to-day job of helping people manage their own performance, about trying to help people managing their performance, taking those little gems that they give you and try and use them for the environment that you're working in. And like I'm working over here and trying to develop 2 businesses. I'm working over here to try to develop members who are going for TRG, SAS, whatever it is. Also people who just want to be better at what they do. And then also trying to be a dad and a husband and everything else. So those tools that they gave me, you can apply it everywhere now. You understand that, okay, even just creating habits and building those habits, understanding what good is and building a habit towards that, it's psychology 101. You just constantly revisit it. Constantly think the way you want to think until it becomes part of your DNA, and then you'll think that all the time. So the performance enhancers, like that massive enabler, and still are.
I've had some eureka moments just listening to you there, and I hope everybody else has. A couple of things to unpack, and then I think we'll wrap it up. If I come to the Mill Gym, I don't expect to have you sit down and lecture me on all the years of education you've done. I want the workout. I want that snippet, and you're going to teach me how to do the best thing I can at that time. And I've often said as a coach, it's very difficult to coach yourself, be that for bodybuilding, be that for fitness, whatever. It's so important to have a coach. But you, Nick, have literally said a coach for your brain. And that's a paradigm shift in thinking about these people. And I can see exactly how it is a performance enhancer for you once you're back to zero. Once you don't need help to get back up to normal, you can now use it as you do for performance enhancements. It's a brilliant way of doing it. It's I've never thought of it like that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, I mean, we know how to physically condition ourselves. We know that we can train our mentality through our physicality. We become harder, tougher people with the more physical challenge we subject ourselves to. Well, that's mentally conditioning ourselves through physicality. But understand there's nuance to it too now. So if we know ourselves well, we can apply these tools even better. If we don't know ourselves well, we're feeling around in the dark. So, trial by fire, trying to forge yourself in the hottest fire, all those sorts of things. But then getting the tools, getting those little gems and all those little mechanisms from people who study it, and they deal with people, not necessarily like us all the time, but people who are constantly trying to navigate stuff.
Yeah.
Well, it's the same tools, effectively. We just need to know how to apply them based on who we are and what we need.
Man, that's brilliant. It's oh man, I hope someone got out something out of it like I just did. That's really changed my mindset. Look, thank you for being so open about chronic fatigue, and you really painted a picture for me on it. What a succinct way you've got of looking at things, and great for pulling yourself out of it. Again, people listening, because it'll be in the show notes, but you've got the millgym.com.
Yep, millgym.com, and we've got an exploration company called omnigox.com, and two, polar opposites in terms of what they do, but effectively culture. The culture is the key thing. Like, if we've got a great culture where people enjoy working there and they love what they do, they have a sense of purpose, they have a sense of community, then that's the goal. And that's effectively my job across the two businesses. I do still coach, I still do running, still do conduct training, but I also coach our own people and hopefully provide an example for our own people. So I love it. I love working with our people. I love doing what we do, and I love that we're doing what we're doing wherever we are, and I'm learning new things every day. So between the two businesses, certainly got our work cut out for me, but once again, I'm working for myself. So I do have business partners, but they have been with me from the start. They understand that I get migraines. They understand that I don't get migraines anymore, touch wood, for years now I haven't had one, because I have control over my life. I have control over how much sleep I get. I have control over the way I think. I have control over my moods. I have control over, every aspect that I need to. And so when I need to exercise that control to mitigate this thing that is bugging me, then I can do it. I have the freedom to do it.
And look, as a interviewer, painting that picture for the listener, Nick's not Superman. Anybody can do this. I learned to go from being $7.50 an hour at 17 years old to a completely different value. Anybody can change themselves. And you talked some amazing things there, controlling the controllables, controlling your behavior and so on, but you can do that. If you're listening, it's absolutely doable, because Nick, you had 6 months off. We've gone through the whole thing that you've spoken about, but you educate yourself and most importantly applied it. And I would like to end on that. Anybody is capable of doing that. It's not just a special forces guy, not just a guy who's driven like you are. Every human's capable. They just need the coaching information and maybe the leading through to get it into their lives.
Absolutely. Finding the right person, finding a mentor like I did, is critical, because if you don't know what good looks like, feels like, what it smells like, how are you going to know what to go after? So find a mentor. I
love that. Yep, you've got to have that target. Awesome, Nick. Well, thank you so much, man. It's been great to have you on the show again. Drop knowledge bombs all over the place. I'll learn to speak English. Thanks for coming on, mate. We'll have a quick chat afterwards, but appreciate you and all the work you do. And everybody go and have a look at the millgym.com. Amazing courses that they run there, and it's a great place. It's an honor to have you on.
Great. Thanks, Damien. Thanks for having me on again.
Thanks, Nick.